Charles, it's another beautiful day in New York, but we are inside today because we have a very important guest. I am delighted to welcome to the show the official White House correspondent for Today News Africa, Mr. Simon Ateba. Simon, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you for having me, guys. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
It's really fascinating. I think I want to begin by apologizing to you on behalf of the people of America for having such a dysfunctional approach where, in theory, journalists are supposed to ask questions and hold the Biden administration and previous administrations to account. But that doesn't seem to be the way the Biden White House works, particularly focusing on your own recent example. Tell us a little bit about what it's like as a practical matter to work with this White House to follow issues of concern to your readers.
So it's been tough for those who have been following us. I used to be their favorite guy in the briefing room. They used to love me a lot because when I got to the Biden briefing room, I asked them a question that was really nice. Many people didn't know that President Biden could be there for more than 2 years. You know, they used to call him Sleepy Joe, that he was too old. And after he managed to be there for a few months, I asked then Press Secretary Jen Psaki if those who used to call President Biden Sleepy Joe should apologize to him. And they were very happy with that question. And so they gave me a few more questions after that. But then in November 2021, South Africa was able to identify the Omicron variant of COVID-19 and informed the WHO. The WHO then informed the US government. And how did the Biden administration react? They reacted by banning South Africa and 7 other countries from Africa from traveling to the US. 6 of those countries had 0 cases of the Omicron variant in their countries. And that was at the time where the variant was also in Hong Kong, in the UK, in different places around the world. And they didn't ban any of them. All of the countries that were banned are mainly black countries. So imagine former President Trump banning 8 Africans or 8 black African countries for a variant that is also in the UK, in Hong Kong, in the US, in different places from around the world. They will have, described him as a racist and, the bad guy. And so when Jen Psaki, who was the press secretary to President Biden, came to the briefing room, she exaggerated the numbers. She wanted to say that there were thousands and thousands of cases in those countries. That's the reason they took the decision, and that was false. So I told her that wasn't true, and she was really embarrassed, and she was, upset, angry with me. And since that day, I became almost their enemy. And now when I ask questions, I try to ask questions at the White House. They don't take my question. And that happened even when President Biden hosted nearly 50 African leaders for the US Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. last December. And for the people who are watching us now, Africa has between 54 and 55 countries, depending on who you ask, the African Union or the UN in New York City. So for 50 African leaders to be in Washington, D.C. to meet with one president, what that means is almost all the leaders of Africa came to Washington, D.C. to have a sit-down meeting with President Biden. Yet, the Africans who are covering the White House were not called on by the press secretary. And it wasn't just me, there were other Africans who were there. And so I complained, I told her that wasn't just disrespecting me, that was disrespecting the entire continent of Africa. And when you do that, what you are doing is you're not actually respecting the First Amendment. And so it's been really hard for me covering the White House. It's been hard for me, trying to do my job, trying to ask the tough questions, trying to shine more light on US-Africa relations. As you know, our newspaper, Today News Africa, focuses on strengthening ties and interaction between US and Africa. If you can see our cover story right now, it's on Angola. I wasn't born in Angola. I've never traveled to Angola. But yesterday, President Biden commemorated the relationship between the US and Angola, and that was an important story for us. One of the stories that we've been doing in the past few days was the killing of US officials in Nigeria. Two of them were killed and were set ablaze. And so those are important stories to us because it has to do with US-Africa relations and interaction. When you make it difficult for me to do my job, you make it easy for the Chinese and for the Russians and for people who don't actually love the US to continue to spread the propaganda against the US and the lies. And it's a shame. It's been really hard.
Yeah, I'm sorry you've gone through all that. It's horrible. We were mentioning off air that in college I actually studied economic and political relationships involving sub-Saharan Africa. I traveled, maybe not as widely as you, but I've done some traveling. And I have a number of friends who operate on the continent and are reporting to me that people are basically getting disgusted with the approach that is taken by the West, that we assert that there's some gigantic problem, and national, whether it's the Global Fund in Geneva or some other fund, and of course the money goes to Switzerland. It doesn't go to Africa. And then we send these teams who may or may not actually go into the interior of Africa to check and see that the projects are viable. And they hire consultants that write reports that say everything's fine. But then when you look, there maybe isn't a road, or there isn't a hospital, or there isn't infrastructure. And the money that is involved here, I think, if you go back to 1975, is probably trillions of dollars have gone towards these projects. But where did the money go?
Yeah, exactly. Most people who grew up like me, I didn't come from an aristocratic family, or I was the son of a poor man and a poor woman, and I've never heard of US aid, which is where the money comes from. I've never heard of US aid. I've never received any assistance from US aid. And I've spent my entire life in Nigeria covering the US embassies and trying to strengthen ties between US and Africa, even when I lived in Africa. And I've never received any assistance from them. They gave assistance to the sons and daughters of the well-connected, the rich people, the US ambassadors in Africa. They don't know the interior of Africa. And when they go to those events, they are well guided with policemen. They don't really have interaction with real people. They live in palaces. They don't have any interaction. I've seen some of them when they're back in the US and they live the normal life they are supposed to live. It's a completely different life. And so trillions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars have gone to Africa. But for ordinary Africans, people who don't have connections, people who are not wealthy, people like me who came from, average families, we've never received anything. And there are more people like me. There are people who are gifted, who are talented, who can actually help to strengthen ties between US and Africa, who are not helped by the US Embassy or the US aid, Samantha Power, and all the stuff that she says. Even here in the US, she has not met with me. I've seen, who did she meet with? When the US Africa Leaders Summit took place in Washington, D.C., they invited all the corrupt people in Africa and they gave them the best treatment here. The people who steal all the money that belongs to Africa, and they invited them here and they gave them the best treatment. And I know this because as a journalist, they gave us the worst food because we couldn't buy food. Everywhere was closed. You can't go to a restaurant. So they had some food. It was the worst. And I decided to go where the presidents were. And when I got to what the presidents were eating, they were having all the best food and the best drinks and the best things upstairs. And those are the people that interact with. Those are the people that Blinken, the Secretary of State, interacts with. Those are the people that the Vice President Harris interacts with when she goes to Africa. She doesn't interact with people like me or people who really need help. Right. Just ask 10 Africans. Ask them, have you ever received anything from US aid? 99.9% of them have never seen any aid from the US.
Yeah. It's my first exposure to that. It was in the spring of 1977, and I was on my junior year abroad. I was in Nairobi, and there was a husband and wife team. The wife was Black American, light-skinned Black American, and her husband was the regional director of USAID. And this woman treated her Kenyan driver worse than driving Miss Daisy. I mean, she was Black, but she, called him names in front of us, and she was, wow. And then she also stole our money.
Whoa!
And I was really upset. Yeah. So I had some connect. This may be the beginning of my journalistic exposure. I went home to do something in America, and I happened to meet somebody from 60 Minutes on the train going out to Connecticut, back to Yale. And I struck up a conversation with this person, and I nearly got 60 Minutes to actually look into this program, wow. Which was stealing money, basically, from a lot of people. And then there is justice, because a number of years later, her husband, went to prison.
Ooh, who was that?
Not because of me.
Yes, the law of karma.
Yeah. Sorry?
Who was the guy who went to prison?
I forget the name. It's 1977, a long time ago. But the point is,
maybe if I can quickly say something. So it's global or international corruption. That's right. What they do. Right. US aid and all the money that goes to all those countries doesn't really go to the people. It's corruption. And then when the people who steal that money come to the US, the people here in the US, they treat them better than people like me, who are actually doing the right thing, because those people with the money they've stolen, they come here, they buy the houses, they pay cash, and so we treat them better. When they come here for the US Africa Leaders Summit, instead of giving more attention to someone like me who is trying to actually do things for the real people, we pay attention to them, we give them the VIP treatment, and it's a shame.
It is. We have some friends who are trying to bring the Clinton Foundation to justice, because that's one major, in my opinion, and I've extensively reported on it, that is a criminal enterprise. It actually doesn't exist from a technical legal standpoint. They don't have articles of incorporation. They don't have bylaws in a crucial period where they raised over $1 billion. And what they do is they go, and other nonprofits, they go around Africa, they find a partner in a poor country, not necessarily just in Africa, and they assert the need for a $200 million project or $1 billion project or whatever. And with their connections in Washington, D.C. and New York, they get the IMF or the World Bank or whatever to send money towards that project. And then they steal the money. And there are credible people who have estimated that, for example, at the Global Fund in Geneva, 75% of the money that's gone through there has been stolen. 75. We're talking about $75 billion, roughly.
Which is a shame, and including, the Clinton Foundation is not my,
sure.
I don't have much expertise on that. But when you see all the humanitarian aid agencies that come to Africa, they drive the best cars, the best protection, live in the best houses, and they live so well that you begin to wonder what they actually do for the people.
Right.
They don't do much for the people, all those people who get millions of dollars in Washington, D.C. At least they don't do for the people who come from where I came from. I didn't come from a rich family. I wasn't connected. I worked hard, went to school and struggled to be here and do what I'm trying to do. And the reason I'm doing it is because I understood that, I can actually do more than those people, because if you are here in the US and you can shine light on where that money is coming from and the impact that money is having in those places, a lot of those people will go to prison because they are crooks. A lot of them, they're just pure thieves. They raise funding in the US, in New York City and Europe, and then they go to African countries and the money doesn't actually go to the people. Actually, 70 to 80% of the money stays with the people who are raising the money.
Right.
Doesn't go to the people, and the other 20% goes to their connections in Africa.
Right.
And so it's criminality. And so if most people who live in the US, who were born here, who have had what we call the US privilege, not the skin privilege, not just being here, being in a country where you can go to school, being in a country where you can have electricity, where you can have safety, the basic things. If many of those people knew my journey and how the struggle and the level of hard work that you have to put in place to remain clean, not to go to jail, not to give up, not to keep doing the right thing, not to being able to go to college. Most of the people who grew up with me didn't even finish what we call primary school. They didn't finish high school. They didn't go to college. They didn't go for a second degree. And I was able to do it. And I saw how everything is corruption. From the IMF to the World Bank, it's almost like criminal activities where they give loans to the people who don't do anything for the people. But the people are not in Washington. The people are in Africa. So the people don't really have all the facts. Sometimes they come to Washington, D.C. to get billions of dollars from the World Bank, and the people who are supposed to benefit from that money, including the money that went for COVID, allegedly for COVID, because of the lockdowns and all the things that they had in Africa. They came here in Washington, D.C. and got billions of dollars for the people. The people didn't receive any money.
Wow.
Right. This, sadly, this is a practice that's been going on for far too long. And I'm not going to ask you details. I'm just going to give you a bit of information that the reason I focus on the Clinton Foundation is they are the ones who, under George W. Bush, they pumped up the size of what's supposed to be a library in Little Rock and operated just what you're describing from bases in New York and Washington, D.C. Bill has all these contacts, Hillary has all these contacts, the Bush family have contacts. It's not just a Democrat thing. And they find somebody who can be a puppet and can say, we've got a $500 million project here. And using their connections, the money goes through the foundation or maybe directly to the country and disappears. It's stolen.
Yeah.
And one way I've found to tell that story to show that the progress hasn't happened. I'm not a huge fan of the CIA, but there's something called the CIA World Factbook. I don't know if you've seen it, that goes country by country around the world, and it tells you how much electricity there is in each country and how many miles of roads and what's the sanitary water condition and this and that. And when you look at those statistics across Africa, it's impossible. You can't provide good health care with no clean water, no electricity across Africa, which the maps that are used distort the size of Africa. They make Africa seem smaller than it is, right? And the US and Europe seem bigger.
Yeah, Africa has almost 1.3 billion people, and many of those people don't have access to electricity.
Right.
Many of those people, actually the majority of those people, don't have access to clean water, to electricity, to the basic things. Actually, it's almost impossible to succeed. Like someone like me to be able, like the mental effort that you have to put into place to say to even understand things like mathematics and engineering and all those things when you don't even have food to eat.
Right.
You don't have water to drink. You don't have electricity. Hundreds of millions of people are already condemned to a life of poverty.
Right.
And there are a lot of people who work hard in Africa. People work hard, but life is so hard for them that they can't even come here. And that brings me to even immigration. When we see what's going on in the southern border, 0.0.1% of people in Africa can come to the US. No one gives them visas. They can't. You can't come here. They don't even have money to fly. The people who fly here for the UN, the World Bank, they are still the same people, the elite. The people who are connected to those people that we were talking about, the people who get money in Washington, D.C. For the ordinary people, they can't come here. They don't have the money. They don't have the visas. And then those who can come here, when they come here, it takes them 6 years for Mayorkas and the other people in the immigration to even look at their papers. Meanwhile, the people who come through the borders, millions, they just cross and they process them. The Africans who are not given visas and who don't have the money to come here, but who are also good people, intellectuals, who go to school and have 2 or 3 degrees, we treat them badly than the people who don't have those things. And it's heartbreaking, but it's also a shame and a failure of the administration to do the right thing. And that's why when I went to the White House, I realized that, the Washington Post, I'm seeing the story behind the screen, on how they are trying to kick me out on July 31st. But the Washington Post, the CNN, they can do stories. Most people who work for CNN in Africa, they don't actually have contact with ordinary people. They also live with the elite. They don't have anything to do with them. And only people like me, if I have the necessary resources, I can build that bridge between US and Africa and track all the people who get all the money in the US in the name of Africans and who don't do anything for them. And what do? They make sure that someone like me doesn't get the resources because I become a danger to them.
Right.
And that's what happens at the White House also, where you're just trying to do your job. Ask the tough questions and just do your job. I don't need to be friendly with the people in power. Actually, that's not our job, to be friendly with the people in power. Just to do your job, ask the questions. Where's the money going? Who got this? Why don't you invest the same if you say it's because of the suffering of the people? 600,000 people died in Ethiopia's Tigray region between 2020 and 2022. And there wasn't any international attention. All the attention has gone to Ukraine, where the president just pledged billions and billions of dollars. Right. Where about the people in Ethiopia? Where about the people in Sudan, where the US embassy in Sudan burned the passports of the people in Sudan who went to the embassy to request for visas? When the war exploded, they burned their passport. Now those people are stranded there. They can't travel anywhere because the US burned their passport. And where about the American people who are stranded in Sudan? 16,000 Americans were registered in Sudan. Many of them are still trapped up till now. So when I'm at the White House, those are my questions, to point out those double standards and ask them questions about how do you treat people. You are supposed to be the president for the little guy, the black guy, the minorities, and that's how he sold himself to the American people and to the world. But you ban 8 African nations for a variant that is also all over the world. You don't react to the crisis in Ethiopia's Tigray region the same way you react to the crisis in Russia, where you can actually, focus on negotiations rather than focusing on, providing jets and weapons and, more war than, even peace. And it's a shame. And that's why they won't give me questions. They won't allow me to talk. They won't allow me to do my job. And now they're trying to kick me out on July 31st. I won't be deterred. I will continue to do my job and continue to speak truth. It's about truth. it's about the job. I don't need to be your friend.
Right.
It's about understanding that. It's about understanding that. We have to just keep doing our job.
Simon, is there anything that Crowdsource the Truth viewers could do to help you fight this unfair treatment you're getting from the White House Press Correspondents Organization? I mean, they can't throw you out. That's really wrong. They're changing rules to try to keep you out. It's terrible.
Yes. Yeah, they're changing rules. You can see the headline in the Washington Post. And actually, the New York Post said clearly that, it's believed that they are targeting me. But they are making a big mistake because they don't know who will be in power in 2020, who will win the presidential election next year. So when you put the rules in place, you don't know who is coming after you. And the person may use the same rules and to actually kick out people that you wanted to be in the White House. It's just 1.5 years left. And so it's a shame. The First Amendment was not there to protect me. It was there to protect freedom of speech, freedom of association, or even the right to petition your government and seek redress. And I'm just there trying to do my job. Imagine if I'd become, maybe I went to a store to attack people. Imagine if I'd become...
right. They'd cover that.
Just imagine. All I'm trying to do, I'm saying that the relationship between US and Africa is important and we need to strengthen it. And I've given my entire life to make sure that we can strengthen that bridge. I'm not asking anyone to pay me. Yes, I want people to subscribe to my Substack and, subscribe to the website. But I don't go to people and say, come and pay me because I will write for you. Or come and pay me. No, I'm just trying to do my job. Right. And the press secretary who doesn't have a clue about what she's doing, she doesn't know anything, she's not traveled to Africa to really see how China and Russia and all the rest, the people who are actually the US enemies are expanding and, building bridges and roads and almost removing the US from Africa. And so, but they don't also believe in democracy. The same people can be in power for years and years and they don't even have, good election. And I'm like, no, I think the best relationship for Africa, now Africa can solve its own problems, but it would be good to have a strong partnership with the US in terms of democracy, human rights, transparency, and that's why I fight for this. And how do they treat me? They treat me by sidelining me. They treat me by, it's heartbreaking. It's almost stupidity.
Well, yeah. I know, Simon, you said you had roughly half an hour, which will give us another 2 minutes. We have as much time as you may need, but could you just comment briefly on what China is doing in Africa as contrasted to what the US is doing?
Okay, so first of all, China doesn't believe in democracy. So even though they are building bridges, there's no transparency in terms of the loans that they are giving to Africa. And just to give you a clear example of what China is doing in Africa right now, a month ago, the head of the US Africa Command came here in Washington, D.C. to testify in Congress. And they asked him, what is the US greatest threat in Africa right now? And he said, China. And he gave, three,
Sure.
And he gave 3 examples. One of the examples was the mineral resources. So 40% of the mineral resources used by US companies are in Africa. And right now, China is building military bases around those mineral resources to just kick out the US. And he warned that if the US doesn't pay attention, they may just lose all those resources. And that's not a good thing even for Africa, because you want to have competition. You want to have everyone come say, hey, how do we, it should be something that benefit Africans and benefit the people who are doing business with Africa. But what we realize is China comes to Africa, gives loan without transparency, gives loan that Africans cannot pay back, and eventually can begin to explore mineral resources, sometimes brings laborers from China to work in Africa and doesn't even employ the local people. But they're also building bridges, which is what the Africans want. They're not there to talk about climate change and gender and all those things. And so for Africans who don't have bridges and who don't have waters, roads and things like that, and China provide those things for them, they will rather do business with those people than the people who just talk about, same-sex relations. I believe that people should be in relations with the person they love, but if that's your focus in Africa, while the other person is building bridges and roads, I mean, you are losing the game, and the US is losing the game. And I'm almost telling them, you're losing the game. I'm not the problem. Don't kick me out from the White House. Right. You need to strengthen me, encourage me, help me to do my job, to build that bridge and drive that conversation between Africans and Americans, instead of trying to treat me the way they are treating me, and it's crazy.
Simon, just one quick question. I know you're saying, I get what you're saying, that China is building things in Africa, and so that's very seductive to the people who want that money. But I noticed earlier you sort of mentioned that you feel that Russia and China are the enemies to the U.S., but isn't it true, certainly in your personal case, Americans within the U.S. are actually enemies of the First Amendment and freedom? I mean, you see it happening. I'm not sure how long you've been in the U.S., but just the last 3 years alone has been such a rapid decline in the individual freedom that we've all come to love and cherish. How do you feel about that? Internal enemies to the United States versus those others?
The reason the U.S. is still the greatest country in the world, at least, the U.S. is still very attractive. People come here because they can't have the level of freedom that people in the U.S. have. The reason the U.S. has been this advanced is because of the First Amendment, because of freedom. If you remove that freedom, then the U.S. ceases to be the U.S. And that's why I'm telling them it has nothing to do with me.
You're right.
Because you start with me, just 2 weeks ago, the president, the White House press office didn't allow a journalist from the New York Post to attend an event in the White House, even though there were 20 empty seats in the White House, because they were afraid that we asked about Hunter Biden laptop. And so when you begin to do that, what you do is, okay, so if President Trump comes back to power next year and he does the same thing, what would you say? You say, he's not respecting the First Amendment, but you are doing it. President Biden has not come to the White House briefing room even once in 2.5 years. And so I'm seeing the dangers. I'm seeing things that I used to see in Africa where, people are being banned from, because they ask questions. Some are being killed, and I'm afraid that if we begin to lose that freedom here, because the U.S. is still that country that people look up to, even in China, even though China is rising, they still look up to the U.S. because of the freedom. And that's why most of the latest inventions in the world in terms of technology, they occur here. Because here people are still free to think, but we are losing it. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that those freedoms and those liberties, all those things are being lost. And if they are lost, the country is doomed. America will no longer be the way it used to be.
Right. I think it's sometimes very valuable to have someone come to the United States from Cameroon and tell us what many Americans have forgotten. This is cherished stuff that we cannot let slip away, because once it's gone, maybe it is already gone. But Simon, it's just really meaningful to hear you say this stuff, and thank you for joining us.
I was going to say one thing, Simon. I'm sure you know that Thomas Jefferson is the author of the First Amendment, and you go into his writings and his history, The speech that he wanted to make sure was protected was the speech that was obnoxious to government, that was critical of government. It wasn't to just only let good things flow out to the populace. He was enough of a student, and he's actually one of my idols for his intellect, to study history of civilization going way back, history of the UK and other countries. And he knew that it was vitally important to protect speech which angers government, because in that way, then you can hope to have a good balance, particularly in the Republican form of government. So you are a modern day hero, sir, and I'm sorry for what you're going through. We are delighted that you spend this time with us. We'd love to have you back and follow what you're doing, and talk more about what's of concern to you, but keep up the fight.
Absolutely. I want to make sure our viewers know that they can follow Simon's work by reading todaynewsafrica.com, and they can also follow him at Simon Ateba on Twitter and Truth Social. Thank you so much for joining us, Simon, and have a wonderful Sunday. For our viewers, we're going to continue in the First Amendment Forum after a short break here, and we'll be back. Please join us. You can join the First Amendment Forum by going to odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, or subscribestar.com or patreon.com. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Thanks so much to Simon Ateba, and thanks everybody for watching.